A town in Ohio fears full moon nights. The cornfields on an old American farm hold a ghastly secret, and a creature stalks cabins in the deep, dark woods. All of this and more in today's episode of Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you should hurry and pre-order my collection of scariest stories I've ever read in my new book, Phantom Phenomena, to make Halloween 2024 unforgettable. Buy it today on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Links are in the description. It releases October 15th. Today's episode features a random assortment of terrifying unexplained accounts, from demons to hellhounds and possible werewolves. Enjoy. Send me your scary stories of the unexplained soon at darkstories.org. And tell me, folks, in the comments, please, what you want to hear next. What topics? At this point, it can be a struggle for me to come up with new topics, so your help is appreciated. Also, my gaming channel is back on, and if you like Oni Plays, I think you might like what we're doing over at Darkness Plays. Go check it out. I'll put that link in the description too. Now, let's begin. A hellhound saved my life. From Ash 124. When I was around 6 to 7 years old, I lived out in the Iowa countryside. We had a small farm with 2 horses and some chickens. For some background, from the right of the property to the left, there was the house, a small shed, horses and chicken coop all inside the pasture, then a mid-size overlook/cliff into the rest of the pasture. In the pasture next to that cliff was a scary mini forest. None of the animals would pass through that forest. There was one large pure white tree in the middle, and bones littering the ground. My sister and I were terrified of it. This is where I think the Hellhound came from. This story pertains to the cliff right next to it. A tree had fallen from the forest onto that cliff, semi-overhanging the cliff itself. It was a dumping area for construction workers, so it had a lot of cement and rods sticking up in it. This was an illegal operation that even my dad didn't know about. The previous owner was the one to give them the okay to do this. He got it straightened out with the law, but they never cleaned up the mess. My dad had told me to stay off the fallen tree because it was not safe due to slippery bark. After he went home, little old intelligent me decided to climb it anyway, because I apparently knew better and wanted to see the view. Well, I got pretty far out onto the tree before slipping and falling off. I hit the ground towards the bottom of the cliff. I was small, so I'm not sure how long the fall was. It was long enough for me to fall on my side and use my hand to protect my head from landing on the cement. I remember only seeing the ground for a second before I hit it and passed out. The next thing I remember is feeling something strange. Heat and what felt like wiry fur on the back of my neck. But I was only conscious for a few seconds. The next thing I knew, I wake up around what I believe to be 2 hours later. I opened my eyes. I was on the top of the cliff again. In fact, I was some distance away from it. My head was pounding. I tried to wipe the blood from my eyes. Within a split second, I saw what I believed to be some kind of angel. Short white hair, one yellow eye, one blue, and possibly wearing Greek-like robes. One blink, and it was gone. Then I got up. I could hardly stand because my head hurt and I was so dizzy. I fell over a few times before making it back home. My mom and dad fought about taking me to the hospital. They wound up not taking me. After a few days, I recovered, mostly. But here's the strange part. I'd wanted to wear my favorite green tractor shirt to school, the same one I wore the day I was dragged, and it looked like a canine muzzle had bitten into it. The teeth in the bite were strange. 3 rows of different sized teeth, and inside of the bite, it was dry. like it had been burned, but without the black soot. I then looked at the mirror before leaving my house and saw a cut across my forehead. When I got back home, I went to investigate the scene of the crime. There was a blood pool where I landed that was dried up, and 4 drag marks in the dirt coming up the cliff with no paw prints, just imprints of my hands and my feet. Full Moon Phenomena. From Rosie82. I'm a veterinarian for a small town in Ohio. In a place like this, where livestock outnumbers people and everyone knows everyone else, you'd think life would be pretty predictable. Mostly it is, but about 2 years back, I started to notice something that shook my understanding of the natural world. It all began on a crisp autumn morning. I had just arrived at the clinic when my assistant, Ginny, rushed in with a worried look on her face. "Dr. Rosie," she said, "the Dunns just called. Something got into their chicken coop last night, and it's bad." This wasn't uncommon. We often dealt with predator attacks on farms. Usually it was coyotes or the occasional feral dog. But when I arrived at the Dunn farm, I knew this was different. The chicken coop looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The heavy wire mesh was torn apart like it was tissue paper. Inside, it was a bloodbath. But what struck me was the precision of the kills. This wasn't the frenzied attack of a hungry predator. Each chicken had been killed with a single powerful bite to the neck. As I was examining the scene, Mr. Dunn approached me. "Rosie," he said, his voice shaking a bit. "I've been raising chickens for 30 years. Never seen anything like this. What do you think did it?" I didn't have a good answer for him. The bite marks were too large for a coyote, and the strength required to rip through the wire mesh ruled out most local predators. I took some samples and measurements, promising to look into it. Over the next few weeks, I nearly forgot about the incident. But then it happened again. This time it was the Petersons' sheep. 3 of them killed, all with the same precision I'd seen at the Dunns. And again, the fence had been torn apart with incredible force. I started keeping a record of these attacks, noting their locations and dates. It wasn't until about the 3rd incident that I noticed the pattern. Each attack had occurred on the night of a full moon. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence. But as the months went by, the pattern held. Every full moon brought a new attack, always with the same characteristics: incredible strength, precise kills, and a preference for livestock over easier wild prey. I began to do some research. I looked into the local wildlife patterns, consulted with rangers and wildlife biologists. Nobody had any explanations that fit. The attacks were too powerful for mountain lions and too precise for bears, too infrequent for any natural predator. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I first stumbled across the term clinical lycanthropy. It's a psychiatric condition where a person believes they can transform into an animal. Most of the medical literature dismissed it as a delusion, but some older texts linked it to the folklore of werewolves. I almost laughed. Werewolves? In our little Midwest town? It was absurd. And yet, the full moon connection, the incredible strength, the animal-like efficiency, I couldn't shake the idea once it took root. Of course, I kept these ideas to myself. I had a reputation to maintain. But I did start paying more attention to the people around town, especially as the full moon approached each month. It was subtle at first. I noticed that some folks seemed more on edge as the full moon approached. One of my clients, a usually calm man named Frank, nearly snapped at me when I suggested rescheduling his dog's appointment that fell on a full moon night. Then there was Abigail, the new high school biology teacher. She'd moved to town about a year ago, around the time the attacks started, I noticed she always looked exhausted after full moon nights, often calling in sick the next day. But the real kicker came about 6 months into my observations. I was working late at the clinic on a full moon night when I got an emergency call. A large animal had been hit by a car on the outskirts of town. When I arrived at the scene, the driver was visibly shaken. "I swear, Doc," he kept saying, "it wasn't a deer. It was walking on 2 legs." The animal, whatever it was, had dragged itself into the woods. We found a blood trail, but it disappeared after about 100 yards. What I did find, though, made my blood run cold. There, half hidden in the mud, was a footprint. It was larger than a person's foot, with clear claw marks at the end of each toe. I made a cast of the print before the police arrived. To this day, I keep it locked in my desk drawer. It reminds me that there are things in this world that defy rational explanation. The next day, I heard that Abigail, the biology teacher, had been admitted to the hospital with severe injuries from a hiking accident. She was out of work for weeks, and when she returned, she walked with a noticeable limp for months. I wish I could say I solved the mystery, that I uncovered the truth behind these strange events. But the reality is, I'm left with more questions than answers. The attacks continue. Every time there's a full moon, always with the same characteristics. I've shared my findings with the local sheriff, but without concrete evidence, there's little more they can do. And I can't really go public with my suspicions now, can I? Who's gonna believe the veterinarian claiming there's a werewolf in the town? After all, I could be wrong. I'm still out here doing my job, treating the animals, documenting the occasional attacks, doing my best to search for the right explanation. All the while, I'll be watching the moon wax and wane, wondering what the next full moon might bring. If you're in Ohio, in a small town, and you see a vet's truck parked out on a lonely back road on a full moon night, give a friendly wave. It's probably me, keeping watch, waiting for the moment when the world of science and the world of legend collide. The Skinwalker. From Kenni. My boyfriend, who's 23 years old, and I, who's 18, wanted to take a camping trip, so we looked for the best trails to get to the campsite. We wanted it to be a good time, and we wanted a beautiful spot. That's exactly what we found. There was a beautiful place by the water, and we got our things packed and headed on our way. It was a long trip, I won't lie, but when we finally got there, I knew it was worth it. The place was stunning. The trees were especially tall, the water was crystal clear. There was the sound of animals all around, the breeze in our hair and faces. Such a serene place. My boyfriend, I'll call him DJ, got the tent set up while I was putting up tiki torches. It was already 7:30 p.m. by then, and we were quite tired. We sat down to make s'mores and tell stories. By 8 p.m. the night had cooled, and there was a nice gentle breeze coming through. Our open fire was roaring. We were talking about how happy we were to take this trip, when suddenly I realized the forest around us went quiet. It was so strange, but I tried to shrug it off. Surely it was a normal occurrence, right? At about 8:45 p.m., I asked DJ if he wanted to go to bed. He replied, "Yeah, that'd be nice. I'm exhausted." So we went into the tent and laid down. My boyfriend, being the faster sleeper, was out in about 10 minutes. Can't blame him with how long the day had been. I lay there struggling trying to sleep. I couldn't figure out why. I swear I felt like I was being watched. A while later, I woke up to hearing footsteps around the campsite, and I began to wonder if it was a lost hiker coming through. I peered out of the tent, and to my surprise, there was no one there. Honestly, I wasn't too worried at the moment, because we were in the middle of the woods, a place home to a lot of different animals. I zipped the tent back up and lay back down. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. A little while later, I woke up again. I think it was around 4 a.m. It was silent still, no noises, nothing that should have woke me up. As I'm wondering why I woke up, I hear this ear-piercing scream. I look next to me to see if DJ was awake and had heard it too. But to my surprise, he was still asleep. I began to hear footsteps again. It was still completely dark out, and after hearing that scream followed by footsteps, I was not about to get out of the tent. Then, there was a thump, thump, thump nearby, like someone was banging on a tree. At this point, I was starting to feel scared. I thought for sure my boyfriend would be awake by now, but he wasn't. I lay back down and tried not to pay attention to any of it, but that was very difficult to do. Whatever was out there with us was breathing heavily, as if it had just been running. I wanted to turn over and just wake DJ up, shake him awake, but I didn't want to make him mad or cause a ruckus, letting that thing outside know that we were awake. That scream came again. My heart began to race, and I was trembling. I couldn't hold down a scream, so I went ahead and forced DJ awake. "Babe, someone is outside," I said. After a few shakes and begs, he finally woke up. I started to explain to him what I'd heard. Seeing me so freaked out, he grabbed his knife and began to exit the tent. About 2 minutes passed before he screamed, "Run to the car!" Without a second thought, I got up and ran towards the car. I heard my boyfriend behind me, followed by what sounded like growling and loud stomping. Well, curiosity killed the cat, and I chanced to look back while running, and I wish I hadn't. I'll tell you what I saw, but I doubt you'll believe me. It was incredibly tall, about 8 feet, with a body resembling a deer, but unnaturally elongated. Its skin was a grayish pale color, almost ghostly, giving a spectral appearance. It had long, thin limbs and sharp teeth jutting out in a menacing way, similar to a crocodile's, making its smile even more unsettling. Its eyes glowed an eerie yellow, and it moved with both grace and an unsettling jerky motion, blending the elegance of a deer with the eeriness of something alien. The combination of features created a bewildering and chilling sight that I will not soon forget. We were scared for our lives, running as fast as we could through pitch-dark woods. As I ran, my foot clipped a rock and I fell down. As I quickly got myself up, I felt a stinging sensation. I looked down to see something, hands or claws maybe, gripping onto me. I looked it right in the eyes too. My heart sank. Sharp teeth, claws, a face of pure nightmare fuel. I screeched, kicking and squirming. It released its grip on me, and I fell. My boyfriend helped me up and put me on his back and began to sprint as fast as he could to the car. When we made it to the car, I looked at my leg. It was gushing blood. My boyfriend sped away, saying, "Screw our stuff, we have to get to the hospital." That drive to the hospital felt like it took hours. When we finally made it there, the doctors were shocked to see my leg. I was asked about what happened, so my boyfriend explained to them that a wild animal of some sort had attacked me. The police were called. We sat and filed a report. Before eventually being released, I ended up with 36 stitches and a fracture in my leg. By the time we got home, it was 8:30 a.m. We went to bed. When we got up, we decided to get our stuff. I won't lie, I was very scared heading back there. It was disturbing knowing what had transpired the night before, Fast forward to 6 p.m. We're back at home, sitting on the couch, just talking, when out of nowhere, we heard 3 loud bangs at the door. I basically jumped off the couch, hiding behind my boyfriend. Something outside screamed. It sounded like it was just outside the door, and it sounded wrong, so unnaturally not human. Whatever it was, it sounded mad and full of hate. We were so terrified. If it was what we saw the previous night, that thing looked like it could tear down any door it wanted. Luckily, it didn't try. It just kept screaming and occasionally banging at the door. But what if it did try? Why did it follow us home? What did it want with us? Unsure of what to do, we called the cops. 2 officers were sent over to our house. We explained what happened, but I don't think they believed us. Honestly, I don't think I would have believed myself. They checked around the entire perimeter of the outside. They found nothing. It's been 2 years since this, and we still occasionally hear something creeping around outside. And I wonder if it's that same beast. I'll leave you with this. If you live in Oklahoma, be safe and don't be in the woods at night by yourself. Demon passing through. From Ashura. I've wanted to write about this experience for a while now, but I've struggled to describe or explain it properly. I wasn't even really sure if it was something worth telling, just because of how random it was. But listening to your show and hearing some vaguely similar stories has given me the confidence to try. For a bit of background, I live in a rural seaside town in New Zealand. As a child, my parents were practicing Wiccans, so spiritualism and the occult were pretty normal concepts for me growing up. Our house always smelled of incense, was full of crystals and interesting artifacts. My mom would occasionally visit friends or friends of friends' houses to cleanse them of unfriendly or bothersome spirits. We moved around a lot when I was very young, and lived in a number of haunted houses ourselves, though those are stories for another time. I myself became a practicing Wiccan when I was a teenager, and I learned how to cleanse places and objects of negative energies, fortify psychic protection, that sort of thing. I've always had this sort of sense for energy, I guess you could say. Like I can walk into a home and feel if it is a peaceful space or a tense space, or contains negative energies. I'm also relatively empathic and can feel subtle shifts in the emotions of people, which I think is connected to my ability to feel other energies. I used to see things that others couldn't when I was young, such as spirits, but no longer as an adult. I no longer actively practice witchcraft, but I am still spiritual and in tune with that aspect of the world. This encounter occurred in 2010. I was 22 years old at the time, a single mom with an 18-month-old baby, living alone in a small rental property. The town is split by a river. On the north side of that river is a range of hills and a beach, between which is sandwiched a small suburb. This is known as the dodgy side of town, mostly containing state housing, and therefore a high proportion of low-income families, the unemployed, drug addicts, and more. On the south side of the river is the main township and another small suburb, where I was living. My street was a long street running parallel to the beach toward the intersecting river. On my street, most of the houses were positioned quite far back from the footpath, with an expanse of lawn in front. My house was one of the last houses on the street before the river, and it sat forward a little further than the others on the street, particularly my bedroom, which jutted outward toward the street further than the rest of my house. It was about 1 a.m. I was just heading into my room to go to bed. I was a night owl back then and tended to stay up late while my child was asleep, so I could enjoy some alone time playing The Sims or whatever. I had turned the bedside lamp on so the room was dimly lit, I remember standing facing the window and street, which faced eastward, as I removed my slippers. Suddenly, I felt something approaching from the south, to my right. It's very hard to explain. I could just sense or feel this dark, nasty thing coming towards me. Before I continue, I should tell you that this encounter took place over the span of maybe 10 to 15 seconds, though it felt longer. In my life, I've been into houses that had, shall we say, disgruntled human spirits haunting them, and therefore had an unpleasant energy. I've never felt scared by such things because they're not strange or frightening to me, having been raised with them as a known and understood part of the world. But this was totally different to anything I'd ever felt in my life. It was pure malice, hatred, malevolence. It was inhuman. My sense of it was so strong that I could see it in my mind, a shadow flying straight down the street about 7 feet off the ground toward my house. I felt my insides suddenly plummet as this instinctive feeling of dread struck me. I had a split second to steel myself before it was suddenly inside my bedroom. It flew through the upper right corner closest to the street and halted, even reversed a little, sort of like when you're walking quickly and need to stop suddenly, and you take a step back to counteract your momentum, or when you notice something and do a double take. Yes, I felt it do a double take as it noticed me, noticing it. It looked like a black swirling cloud, about 2 feet across, opaque around its roiling edges, but becoming more dense in the center. I knew on some level that I wasn't actually seeing it with my eyes, but more like with my mind so vividly that I perceived it as an ocular sense. It hovered there in the corner of my room by the ceiling, considering me with cold curiosity. I knew this in the same way that I had known it was coming. I could feel it with every fiber of my being. Some innate understanding or ancestral knowledge, I don't know. But I knew somehow this thing was not a human spirit. It was something totally different. I knew it had been heading somewhere specific, with all of its malicious intent, to feed on the fear, pain, and despair of humans. It just so happened to pass through my room, which stood in its path, and it noticed me because I had noticed it. I felt it peering at me, calculating, deciding. In that moment, I drew on my mental shields, calling upon my preferred deity for strength and protection, instinctively fortifying myself for whatever spiritual attack was coming. I would love to say that I felt my body flood with warmth and light or something cheesy like that, but that's not usually how it works for me, though I always feel a sort of tingling in my body. I felt my will harden into something burning and angry around myself, just my own energy becoming a metaphysical shield of sorts. I was painfully aware that I was alone in the house with a vulnerable small child asleep in the other room, and my instincts as a mother to protect him filled me with unusual ferocity. I envisioned myself surrounded in flames, ready to lash out if that thing got any closer. It sounds super corny, I know, but in spiritual affairs, it's your mental conviction that counts. At least in my experience. It doesn't matter what your faith or belief system is. It's the strength of your connection to it that enables you to cleanse and repel negative energies. I kept my eyes trained on that dark entity, telling it with my mind that I wasn't going to be an easy target. Just then, I felt a shift in energy, a complete withdrawal of its attention, dismissal, and in the blink of an eye, it whirled straight across my room and out the wall, northward on its original path. Its awful presence faded from my senses, and the encounter was over. I stood there for some time, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. My insides felt like jelly, and as the adrenaline faded, I felt sick. It was hours before I was able to sleep. I lay in my bed, wondering what that dark spirit was doing now. It had headed north, toward the bad side of town. Somehow I knew it had business in that part of town, and it had decided I wasn't worth being sidetracked for. Was it feeding off the vulnerable people there, or did it possess people already weakened by negativity? Would I wake up in the morning to a story in the paper about some domestic violence incident in the night, or a suicide, or murder? Did it influence people like that, or did it just show up to engorge itself on their suffering? Mostly, I wondered if it would come back. But it never did, and I have never sensed anything like that entity since. I know what I saw was demonic. I don't believe in demons in a biblical sense, because I don't believe in a Christian God or devil, heaven or hell. But I do believe in non-human spirits or entities, things that have always existed alongside us, or perhaps come into existence because of us. And those that are dark, evil, which exacerbate or feed off of human suffering, are what I consider demons. I have heard a number of somewhat similar sightings on this show, and I'm sure there are countless more out there. If you find yourself confronted by something like this demonic spirit, think of something that can give you spiritual power and protection, whether it's a god, angel, or saint, a place of spiritual significance to you, or the spirits of your ancestors. Whatever it is, call it to you. You might find that it's enough to send that thing on its way. There's a demon in my school. From Horrart King. I live in a small town in the southern United States. I go to a rather small high school. It houses around 200 students, more or less, and we have a football field by it. The strange encounters started around 2019. At first, my friend was in the school after baseball practice, filming in one of the long hallways, when he saw a head poke out from a door. He ran over and looked at where the head had ducked back, but there was no one there, only a locked door. My friend said he had heard no door close, no footsteps, nothing. He had just seen a face. It doesn't stop there. My other friend, Carter, said he had heard whispers outside his window and voices outside his door at late hours in the night. I didn't have anything happen to me until I heard a scream outside my house at 1:40 a.m. When I peered outside my window, I saw this unnaturally dark figure standing in my big lawn. It looked between 6 to 9 feet tall and was pitch black. It was unmoving, but I heard its screams. It sounded like a man with water in his throat, trying to scream. I was horrified. I couldn't look away from this man screaming at the top of his lungs on my lawn. I couldn't make out any more features. It was like a living shadow. But was it a shadow? I'm not sure. I didn't want to know for sure. I closed my curtains and stayed in the corner of my room until the break of dawn. Another incident happened about 2 weeks after the first one. I was awakened in the middle of the night by my mother wondering what I was doing. When I tried to open the door for her, I couldn't, like someone was holding it shut. I checked the lock because maybe I forgot to unlock the door, but the door was unlocked. I tried for at least 30 minutes to open my door, but I couldn't. Then finally, like someone letting go, it popped open as if nothing had ever happened. My mother asked me what happened, but I couldn't give her a clear answer. One night when I was leaving a basketball game at the high school, I swear I saw that same shadow figure I saw on my lawn in the window of the school. It was staring at me, like it was waiting for me to move. I stared at it, and it stared at me for what felt like forever, when someone finally walked up to me and asked if I was okay. I glanced at them, a woman, and when I looked back to the window, the figure was gone. No one else saw it. No one heard voices or whispers. No one knew what happened. But I was relieved that it had stopped. On another occasion, at my brother's football game, I saw something again. A black flash dashing from corner to corner. I was about 50 feet away from the school when I saw it. My friends were there too. I asked them if they'd seen it, and they confirmed my sighting. Then the flash stopped at a window, and by God, it looked wrong. Its neck looked like it was 2 feet long at least, and it was very tall. I would say at least 12 feet. And before we could look at it for more than a second, it vanished before my friend's eyes and my own. We marched around the school, checking all the doors to see if we could get inside. But all the doors were locked. While one of my 3 friends decided to go get someone, the 3 of us left there waited. I decided to look around one more time when one of the doors I swear was closed was now open. The one friend came back, and we all went inside the school. We were about to walk through the door when I noticed something. A shadow behind the door, like someone was waiting for us. My friend was about to walk through when I stopped them and told them what I noticed. We all looked under the door, and there was in fact someone standing there. We decided to go the other way. When I rounded the corner, I heard loud footsteps following me, and I bolted to the exit door. When I looked back, I saw something horrific. It was the long neck thing from before, but I could see it. It was awful. It had no eyes, just eye holes, and they looked like the darkness in the eye holes went on forever. It had no teeth, only a forever grin while it was chasing me. Its arms were almost as long as it was tall. It used them to grab nearby objects, pulling itself along and propelling itself faster. I dove out of the school and turned around in a flash. It looked at me, then walked back into the depths of the school. I was beyond disturbed. I decided to never go back into that school at night again. I still live in that small town. I just know that that thing is still in the school somewhere. My friends don't like talking about it, and we've tried to move on. Sometimes I hear stories from little kids about something in the school, and I don't tell them that those stories are true. Benign possession or haunting. From Drew Z. Back when I was still earning my undergraduate degree, I experienced something so paranormal, it changed everything I thought was possible. My roommate at the time was also my childhood best friend, and I knew him well enough that he undoubtedly did not believe in ghosts. To him, that was something crazy people talked about. He was an avid outdoorsman, socially outgoing in Greek life, and was a good student with a strong work ethic. Simply put, he did not have time to dwell on fantasies. So to have his validation towards the end of our haunting was surreal. He knew me long enough that he remembered my brother passing in high school, so he also knew that I was very spiritual as a result. It began shortly after he and I hurriedly moved into our new apartment, after our previous roommate's situation expired. This place was older, and definitely gave just a weird vibe. We were young and broke, so I don't think either of us cared. It was a duplex with 2 units, a downstairs 2-bedroom apartment and an upstairs 2-bedroom apartment. We had a couple that lived downstairs for the first couple of months we lived there, and so we were used to hearing them walk around or playing music. Occasionally, he played drums, but generally, they were pretty quiet and respectful. About a week after they moved out, I began to hear louder footsteps than usual, and doors being slammed. I thought it was someone the landlord hired to repair something, but there were no cars or trucks in the driveway. Initially, I just brushed it off, but a month had gone by, and I was still hearing it. I asked my roommate if he'd heard anything, but he just shrugged his shoulders and replied, "It's probably just some workers," and went back to his studying. I felt as if I was going crazy. The downstairs unit stayed vacant for a few months, and somewhere in the second month, I got a phone call late at night from him. I was staying at my girlfriend's house when he asked in a panicky voice, "Bro, did you just run up the staircase?" There was only one entrance into our apartment, and his room was right next to the stairs. He said he heard the door open and slam, then someone sprint up and down the stairs. He reports that the door did not slam a second time. He was so spooked that he had taken to the stairwell with his firearm drawn. He walked the perimeter of the house to reveal nothing. Over the next month, he had been hearing sounds the same as me, but had been staying gone more than usual. It just so turns out my girlfriend began staying more at my place around that time, and she was first to notice that my mood was changing. Every time I was home, I just felt dark energy. Apparently, I was also waking up multiple times throughout the night and going away for long periods of time. She eventually decided to drop in and see where I'd gone, but she found me standing upright with my eyes closed. She was so panicked, yet she didn't wake me. The next morning, I awoke with 3 big scratch marks all the way down my back. She told me that that was the sign of a demon, but I don't know if I believe that. Our new neighbors downstairs moved in, and it's like it all stopped for a while. They were considerably louder and loved to party, so the demon situation sounded a lot better. I would later continue to hear sounds. Sometimes we would walk into rooms and all the lights would be on, or all the cabinets and drawers would be open. Nothing was ever taken or stolen, and neither one of us recalled ever doing that. But those things began to happen weekly. He had one more stairwell experience before he moved out, but the weirdest thing happened after I finally left. Needless to say, my neighbors and I were not friends, so to receive a phone call from them meant something significant. I'd been moved out for a week then, and I got a phone call saying, "Would you shut the heck up? I don't know what you're doing up there yelling and slamming doors, but it's 3 a.m. Shut up." I told her to go upstairs and open the door, and she would see that no one was there since I'd moved out a week ago. So she went upstairs, and all the lights were on, and yet there was not a soul inside. I was terrified for months after that. I thought a shadowy figure was going to follow me to my new place, and I would just see dark silhouettes in the window one night staring into my soul, waiting to leech energy off me again. It was all so creepy. Cabin in the Woods. From Eagledrift. Growing up in a small town in northern Maine, I was more concerned with practical matters like chopping firewood and helping Dad fix our beat-up truck than ghost stories or urban legends. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. This happened to me in the summer of 2006. It was early June, and I had just finished my junior year of college. I was looking forward to a quiet summer back home, working at the local hardware store and spending some free time fishing at the lake. My childhood best friend Grayson had other plans. He'd heard about an old cabin deep in the woods, about a 3-hour drive from our town. Supposedly, it was abandoned, but still in decent shape, and he thought it would be the perfect spot for a week-long getaway. I wasn't so sure about that. The idea of staying at some random cabin in the middle of nowhere didn't exactly appeal to me just yet, but Grayson was persistent, And eventually, I gave in. We only live once, and we don't stay young too long. We packed up his old Jeep with food and sleeping bags and fishing gear, even threw in a couple of rifles just in case. The drive there was uneventful, mostly winding roads through dense woods. As we got further from civilization, I noticed my cell signal was getting weaker until it disappeared entirely. Grayson assured me it was normal for this area, and I'll assure you that back in that time period, that happened quite a lot in the mountains. Even so, I wasn't entirely comfortable with having no cell reception. We arrived at the cabin at sunset. It was smaller than I'd expected. A simple one-room structure with a small porch out front. The wood was pretty weathered, but it looked solid enough. Inside, there was a stone fireplace, a couple of old chairs, and a rickety table. It was basic, but it would do for a week. The first couple of days were actually quite enjoyable. We hiked, fished in a nearby stream, and sat around the campfire at night, sharing stories and beers. It almost felt like we were kids again, no care in the world. It was on the third night that things began to take a turn. We'd gone to bed early, planning to get up at dawn for a long hike. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a sound I couldn't quite place. It was this low vibration, not like an animal, I would say. It seemed to be coming from all around us, vibrating through the cabin walls. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. "Grayson," I whispered, "do you hear that?" There was no response. I looked over to where Grayson had been sleeping and saw his empty sleeping bag. I felt a bit of panic rise up in me. Where did he go? Did he go outside? Why wouldn't he wake me up if he was leaving? The vibration grew louder, and I swear it sounded like a growl. I then heard something moving around outside the cabin. Heavy footsteps, but not like any animal I'd ever heard. They were slow and deliberate. Reminded me of a person, but not exactly that either. I grabbed my flashlight and one of the rifles. Slowly, I made my way to the cabin door. Suddenly, the growling stopped, but I could still hear the footsteps. They circled around the cabin. "Grayson!" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Grayson, are you out there?" No response, just more footsteps. I don't know what made me do it, but I opened up that door. Outside, the night was pitch black, no moon or stars visible through the thick canopy of trees. I swept my flashlight beam across the clearing in front of the cabin, and that's when I saw it. About 20 feet away, just at the edge of the trees, stood something. It was tall, about 7 feet, and vaguely human in shape. But its arms were way too long, nearly touching the ground, and its legs seemed bent wrong. Its skin seemed to shift and ripple, like it couldn't decide what texture it wanted to be. And I saw its face. It didn't have features so much as suggestions of features. Where its eyes should have been, I saw dark, empty holes, and its mouth was a gash that opened and closed rhythmically, revealing rows of sharp, thin teeth. I stood there, paralyzed. The thing slowly turned its head, angling it towards me. For a moment, it just stared. Then, it took a step forward, and I snapped from my trance. I slammed the door shut and fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I backed away from the door, rifle aimed up and ready, though I doubted it would do much good against whatever that was. The cabin was silent for a moment, and then I heard her scratching. Something was trying to get in. I'm not sure how long I stood there listening to it, rifle pointed at the door. But eventually the scratching sound did stop, replaced by that low rumbling growl I'd heard earlier. And then silence. I didn't move for the rest of the night. As the first rays of sunlight started to filter through the cabin's dirty windows, I heard a noise outside. Footsteps again. But normal this time, very much human. "Hey, you up?" It was Grayson's voice. I nearly cried with relief. I rushed to the door and flung it open. There stood Grayson, looking confused at my disheveled appearance and the rifle in my hands. "Where the heck have you been?" I demanded. What are you talking about? I went for an early morning hike. Told you last night I was going to do that, remember?" No, I didn't remember. In fact, I couldn't recall much of anything from the previous evening. Had I dreamt the whole thing? But then I saw them. Deep, jagged scratches on the outside of the door, splintering the wood. And on the ground was a set of footprints, unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were huge, twice the size of my boot. They led from the tree line to the cabin door, circling around, then back into the forest. Grayson saw them too. I watched his face go pale. What made those? I then told him everything that had happened last night. To his credit, he didn't laugh or tell me I was crazy. He'd grown up in these woods too, and he knew there were things out there that couldn't easily be explained. We packed up right away and left. The week-long trip cut short after just 3 days. The drive home was tense and quiet. I think the two of us were quite jumpy. And for a few weeks, I had trouble sleeping. One doesn't get over the most horrible-looking creature sighting they've ever had in their life just like that. I haven't been back to those woods since. I doubt I ever will, 'cause it's probably still out there. And I've always wondered, is there more than one of them? I used to scoff at people who believed in the paranormal, but after this, I had to rethink everything. The Cornfields. From Estellabra. The first thing you should know is that I never wanted to move back to my hometown. But life has a way of bringing you full circle, doesn't it? After my mom's stroke, I didn't really have much choice. Someone had to take care of her. My sister was busy with her own family halfway across the country. So there I was, 32 years old, divorced, and back in the same creaky farmhouse where I grew up, surrounded by endless fields of corn and soybeans. It was late August when I moved in. The air was thick with humidity, and the constant buzz of cicadas filled the evenings. Mom was still in the rehab facility, so I had the house to myself for a few weeks. I spent my days cleaning out years of accumulated junk and trying to make the place livable again before she got back. The house hadn't changed much since I left for college. Same faded wallpaper in the kitchen, same worn-out carpet in the living room. Even my old bedroom was exactly as I'd left it. Posters of long-forgotten bands still taped to the walls. Felt like I stepped back in time. Not in a good way. I'd been there about a week when I started to have these dreams. At first, they were just flashes, glimpses of cornfields at night, the sounds of children laughing, but they grew more vivid each night. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, a feeling like someone had been watching me sleep. Then came the night I saw something. I'd fallen asleep on the couch watching some late-night talk show. I woke up suddenly, that feeling of being watched stronger than ever. And there she was, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing an old-fashioned dress. She was pale and almost glowing in the dark. She was staring right at me. I blinked, and she was gone. I told myself it was just a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and a lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew I'd seen something that was very real. The next day, I couldn't shake the image of that little girl from my mind. So I sat back to doing chores, trying to keep myself focused. But from time to time, I swear I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. When I would turn to look, there'd be nothing there. That evening, I decided to call my sister. I didn't tell her about the girl. I didn't want her to think I was losing it, but I asked her if she remembered any stories about our house being haunted.
"Not really,"
she said.
"But do you remember old Mr. Johnson? He used to say something about the Miller girl who disappeared back in the 50s. Said she haunted the cornfields. But that was just a story to keep us kids from wandering off, wasn't it?"
I mumbled something non-committal and changed the subject. But after we hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. The Miller girl. Why did that sound familiar? I spent the next few days researching local history. It was a lot more difficult than I expected. Our town was too small to have its own library, and the county seat was a good hour's drive away. But I managed to dig up some old newspapers on microfiche. And there it was, in faded black and white. 1956, local girl missing, foul play suspected. The article was brief, just a few paragraphs. An 8-year-old Miss Miller had vanished from her family's farm. Last seen playing near the cornfields, no body ever found. The farm where Sarah had disappeared, it was ours. My parents had bought it in the 80s, long after the case had gone cold. They probably never knew its history. That night, I dreamed of the girl. I saw her running through the cornfields, laughing. But then the laughter turned to screams, and I woke up, gasping for air. She was there again, standing at the foot of my bed. This time, she didn't disappear when I blinked. She just stood there, looking at me with sad eyes. "Hello?" I whispered. She stared at me. After several long moments, she slowly raised her arm and pointed towards me. Or at least, I thought it was towards me. But I soon saw that she was pointing past me, towards the cornfields outside. She mouthed 2 words. I honestly can't tell you what they were. I was never any good at reading lips, and she didn't make any sound when she did it. But to me, it looked like she had said, "Find me." This was very disturbing. Had the ghost of a little girl just signaled to me where her body might be? That her body was still on our farm? "What?" I asked, and the moment I did, her form simply vanished. I stood straight up and rubbed my eyes, wondering if that had been just a very vivid dream. But there was no way. Up until my mother came home, I developed a new hobby: digging. I dug up holes all over the cornfield. I looked for spots that seemed different from the rest. Spots I might think would hide a body at some point. But once my mother came home and I had to tend to her, I shrugged off this new obsession. But I think Miss Miller is out there, somewhere on our land, begging to be put to rest. And I feel some guilt that I wasn't able to find her. If you're ever driving through the rural Midwest, and you pass by endless cornfields stretching towards the horizon, just remember that every piece of land has its stories, and underneath that soil might lie something which cannot rest. Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. If you're not already, follow and listen to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Leave us a rating while you're at it. Get some cool creepy merch at eeriecast.store. Check out my other show where I narrate scary work stories. It's called Tales from the Break Room. For more terrifyingly entertaining shows from EerieCast, go to eeriecast.com. And if you want to listen to Unexplained Encounters and all the other EerieCast shows without pesky ads, sign up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. You'll also get exclusive access to horror audiobooks only available to EerieCast Plus members. And you'll get 20% off our EerieCast.store merch through our members-only monthly discount code. Finally, if you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.